This video is not for everyone. If you've seen the title, you know what I'm going to talk about. If you don't care about what I'm going to say, you can feel free to click off now. If you're interested in the topic, howdy. My name is Nonat. It's about 9 a.m., which for me is incredibly early. I've been on the fence about making this video for the last week or two, and I finally decided to hunker down and make it. And of course, we're talking about the recent Polygon article, which goes by the title, Pixar's Onward spawned a surprisingly good D&D clone. Now, I know this isn't a big deal to everyone, but I know there's a good deal of people on the internet who had some issues with this title. Simply calling a tabletop RPG a D&D clone kinda has some negative implications. I shouldn't say negative implications, but rather negative connotations. The meat of the article is fine. It really just goes into how Quests of Yore works, top to bottom, a quick little insight into the rulings. That's not what I'm here to talk about today. Today, I just want to talk about the term D&D clone and the damage that can do to the TTRPG sphere. Now, Polygon is not the first, nor is it going to be the last offender in this right. Calling something a D&D clone is just clickable. Whenever people see TTRPG, they might not know what that means, but especially with the advent of Stranger Things and Critical Role, when people see D&D, even if they've never played it before, of course they know what it means. From a marketing standpoint, I totally get it. You gotta do what'll get you clicks, you gotta do what's going to make you money so you can afford to eat that night. Believe me, I get that. My big issue with it is just the incredible disservice it does to the developers, the producers, and everybody who work on other tabletop RPG systems, which, because of this stigma, are now being permanently compared to the grandfather D&D, no matter what they do to differentiate themselves. Even completely different games like Call of Cthulhu or Shadowrun are still being compared to D&D, even though their rules are 99.99% different. I've heard people lately defending it by comparing it to tissues and Kleenex. You know, some people may just call every tissue a Kleenex because Kleenex is the most popular brand. But I do have to disagree with that comparison. When it comes to tissues, they are absolutely cloning Kleenex, and I'm sure Kleenex wasn't even the original tissue. But the reason I'm okay with those being considered clones of Kleenex is because they're not changing the formula. If you look at how they are made versus how Kleenex are made, the process is going to be exactly the same. You can even see this in grocery store generic brands. If you look at the Blue Diamond almonds and the knockoff grocery store almonds, they're still almonds. They're still clones of each other because the ingredients list is the exact same. However, if you compare D&D even to its closest in similarity competitor of Pathfinder, you'll find that the rules are very, very different. These two books are not the same and they don't serve the same purpose. I think an important distinction is that a clone is trying to steal the customers and steal the audience of an existing product, whereas something that is similar is trying to expand the product or appeal it to a different demographic. For example, D&D 5e is an incredibly easy entry point for anybody's first TTRPG, whereas Pathfinder 2nd Edition is obviously much, much hardier, much more complicated, which a lot of people might be looking for. These two games do not apply to the same audience, and thus I would never consider them clones of each other. The same goes out to really every other tabletop RPG in existence. Call of Cthulhu uses a D100 system. Shadowrun uses a D6 system. I think Monster of the Week uses a different D6 system. They all play completely differently, and they all are used to reach an end by a different means. I think the reason this is such a big deal to me and other people on the internet is not because we're mad that people are saying it. I want to be totally clear about that. I am not upset with anybody who is saying this because it just makes sense. Hell, when I tell my mom what I do for a living, I say, yeah, I talk about Pathfinder. It's kind of like D&D. And, you know, that makes sense to her, because even though she doesn't care and doesn't play any of it, she's heard of D&D before, because when it comes to popular media, D&D is at the first and foremost, the front. So I guess in the end, this is more of a rant, because I guess I'm part of the problem too. And it's this unfortunate stigma that we are finding ourselves really unable to break out of. And as I said before, it just doesn't feel good, because it feels like no matter what someone does, no matter what they try to innovate, if your game involves pretending and rolling dice, it is a D&D clone, and it will be easily compared to D&D, even if your game is about rolling 2d10s against eldritch horror abominations, it's still a D&D clone. I mean, I guess even board games aren't perfect. You know, if you're playing any kind of deck builder, it's going to be compared to Dominion. So I don't know. I think the problem with board games is at least there are so many subgenres to compare around, whereas tabletop RPGs are still, I don't want to call them young. They're not in their infancy. They've been around for 50 plus years, but they're still all compared to one single product, and I think that's a problem. How we fix it, I have no idea, but I would love to hear how you think we should fix it. So let me know down in the comments. I've just been doing my best to avoid saying D&D when talking about other tabletop RPGs as much as possible. I think that's all we can do. Also, one last thing, don't go off on anyone who says, oh, I'm going to play, it's like D&D. Don't go off on them, don't get mad at them. It's just society at this point, you know? You can't blame someone for saying it because it's the safest thing to say. So that's all for me. Let me know in the comments what you thought. Leave a like if you agree, leave a like if you disagree. You should subscribe no matter what because it helps the channel going forward. So thank you all so very much for watching. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, patrons. And until next time, no nat ones.